Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and happy Hanukkah and welcome to night 6 of the ChemKnits Hanukkah special. Tonight we are going to go back in time to 2019 when I was attempting to develop a colorway for last year's Hanukkah special. I really wanted to create something that evoked the flicker of candlelight in a room surrounded by darkness. But what I created in that oops video was a little closer to Halloween. So I thought it would be fun to tonight take another shot at this and try to create some fire and some darkness. And yeah, let's go see what we can create. I believe the 3 colors I used back in the day were some fluorescent lemon, safety orange, and fuchsia, but they all blended together into sort of a reddish orange because I did this low immersion. Since then, I have learned you can get some really amazing fluorescent speckles, especially mixed with citric acid. And in particular, the fluorescent safety orange seems to have a little bit of an orange with a yellow halo. Perfect for a flame type feel. So I think for the flame portion of this colorway, I might just focus on the fluorescent safety orange. But we're gonna do a little test to get a feel of what we want. Right here I have 3 10-gram mini skeins of wool to dye for platinum silk. This yarn is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. And these have soaked in some water with a couple tablespoons of vinegar. And we are going to speckle on them using some citric acid mixed with our fluorescent safety orange dye. And right now we have 1 tablespoon of citric acid powder in here. Now with these 3 mini skeins, on one of them I'm going to go light, on one of them I'm going to go medium, and on one I'm going to go heavy to help me get a feel of the kind of speckling powder I want. Now that I am going to deal with the acid dyes, I have put on my respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves. And I'm going to take, a good tip of the spoon, add it to our citric acid, and then stir it up to distribute the dye around the powder. This not only helps some of the color strike, but also spreads it out really, really nicely. And this spread is part of what will allow us to see nicely defined speckles versus having more clumps of powder. And so the light one that I'm doing still isn't that light. Maybe I should try to go lighter here and just have the barest amount. You want your glove really dry when you do this. Okay, so let's let this one be our medium. And then this one's going to be our heavy, where I am going really, really big. Maybe I squeezed out too much liquid. There's a lot going on the counter, but I will get another yarn mop over to wipe things up. All right, so we have our light, which I just flipped, and coming in really light and sparse. We've got our medium, which the medium is fairly heavy as far as speckles go, but compared to this last one where I am really almost just taking pinches of the powder and dumping, this one I'm doing as much coverage. This is the closest to one of those yarn mops at the end. So I have a feeling that I might like this one a lot. I'm going to do a little more on the light and medium. I'm now going to go rinse off my gloves and I'll bring you closer to each of these samples. Okay, the specks are starting to go in. Here on our medium, the speckles, it looks like a lot. In person on camera, I don't quite see as many, but there are like pretty regular heavy speckles. Here I used a lighter touch, really tried to be sparing. And then finally over here, I went for it. I sort of gooped that powder on heavy. You can see a lot of them. And I am now going to carefully place all 3 of these skeins in my steamer basket. So that way they can steam set for about 20 minutes and I can determine which one of the colors I really want. Because since we still see so much of the wet powder on the surface of the yarn, it's hard to say what the actual yarn itself will look like. So we'll come back once we're ready to take those out of the steamer basket. And if there's anything that exemplifies the light, medium, and heavy nature, I think that it is this left on the counter. One other note, all the tools and equipment that I'm using today are dedicated for dyeing yarn and are absolutely not used for food. Oh, interesting. There was a pinkish speck in there. That's pretty cool. This is just another mini skein, or I guess technically micro skein. I will be using yarn mops today to mop up as much of our excess color as I can. I will wipe the counter somewhat in between with this like light layer left, but once, you know, this is how I will be wiping up in between various samples, and I will go ahead and steam set this later. But this orange and yellow that we see in here is very flame-like, and so if the speckling doesn't work out, I can add some powder to the surface and do this kind of effect, because this looks very, very flame to me. All right, let's take a closer look. I am so glad we did this test. The heaviest one, where I was really, really going in, is the closest to what I want to see. On our medium and the light, you can see we are having like some pink, orange, and yellow speckles just from that fluorescent safety orange. So I think just using that color is the way to go. And even on our heavier, this is what I'm wanting to see, but I think I'm gonna move it a little bit. Not rub as much as I did with that yarn mop on the counter, but I think that something in between these speckles and this flame is where I want to be. So I think heavy speckles with some rubbing, I think we are on the right track. I just finished steaming this mop and there are some little speckles in there, but I do think I want a combination of the two. And in there, where it is super heavy, looks like little flames, yay! Okay, we've got connected mini skeins today, and here's my dilemma. For the next step, it'd be really handy if the dyed portion is up near the zip tie. And so actually maybe that's what I will try to do, is to create the color near the zip tie. And do my best to move it around, since we're going to be wanting to move it around anyway. And eventually I might do more than this one at a time. Let's go. I'm not sure how low I'll dip into the darker color, but let's plan on a bit. And again, I'm going to be touching it. There will be some color introduced further down. That is not a problem, and actually the bit of color spread from me touching it up here
is also not a problem because we wanted sort of this combination of the speckles and that resulting flame. So that is good. Now the one area that I want to double check is in here. Okay, I think that if I was doing this with full skeins, and I'm now patting it a little bit, if I was doing this with full skeins, it would be a little harder to be even. But let's go steam set this. All right, I'm gonna sort of wipe my hands down here. I don't know if I'll be doing this on all of them, but yeah. Okay, hopefully I recorded that whole last thing. But let's do the same thing. And this time I've got 2, which I think is probably the limit of what I can fit on my counter at any one time. But we're picking up some of that color that we left behind. But I did bring over a couple extras to use as yarn mops. Now I'm absolutely going to need to mix up more of my dye. And I'm trying to get my fingers dry as I can before starting. Yeah, I'm going to need a lot more of the dye. I hope I'm not using too much so that we'll see some bleeding. But I need to remember the amount of dye that I pulled onto the spoon was ultimately not that much compared with everything else. Let's go sort of inside before, whoops. This one might be more flamey because my hands are a little bit wet. Yeah, if your gloves are wet, then the dye is going to stick to them versus sticking to the yarn, which is what you want. So, if possible, try to use your other hand for some of this application. But, you know, and then I don't listen to my own advice, but we want sort of a sloppy speckle thing going on here. So, and I think that we are achieving that. And sort of dirtying this up while also taking advantage of some of this color on the counter. I am going to pop these 2 in with that same steamer basket of the first one. But it does feel very flame-like to me right now. All right, so 1 tablespoon of our mixture lasted on a bit over 300 grams of yarn. Before I mix up any more, I want to see the results from that first round. Because I want to know, I want to see and I want to know how intense things were, if maybe I wish that they would have been subtler. We will see.
The nice thing is that if I decide that I added too much dye on this first round, this is something that is really easy for me to correct while still being exuberant and adding lots of powder onto the yarn. I could start off with more tablespoons of citric acid powder and a similar amount of acid dye, which means that I'm working with more volume, but the actual amount of dye that I'm adding is more dilute. Or really I could just add less dye to the same volume of citric acid. Both of those are fairly equivalent, but since I know that I added about the whole volume to the 300 grams, this is a helpful place to know how to proceed going forward. Now, you can measure these proportions, and especially if you're trying to go for consistency of something that's otherwise by feel, that might be a good way to go. But I typically go a little bit by feel, both in terms of how I add the color and how much color to mix in with the citric acid. So that is just something to keep in mind. Let's check out how this went. Ooh, that is so flamey. I love it. I absolutely love it. I love the speckles. I love the pops of color. I am really happy with the coverage. It's very steamy in here. We've got some beautiful speckles. These were the second two I did. The first one is back there. Again, we're steamy, but everything is beautiful. I'm gonna go ahead and dye the rest off camera, following this general technique and also the general proportions. I don't feel a need to modify them at all. But I'll set these aside to cool so then we can get ready to add the darkness to our brightness of candle.
Okay, we have this much dye left and one last little yarn mop. I probably will grab another couple mops, but let's just see. Oh, actually, there might not actually be that much pigment left. So ultimately, this was pretty good in terms of the amount of coverage. So I am thrilled with that. And we'll put this in the cup. And I will steam this with the rest of the yarn and then go ahead and carefully clean everything up, making sure to wipe my floors just in case.
Now I want to bring in the shadows. And I could go straight for black, but I think that even though we see this flame and fire, if I go just for the black, I think it'll still read very Halloween. So I want to do a proportion of the black with some blued steel to cool down that darkness and make it more midnight versus black. And I think I'm going to do about a 50-50 mix of the two. And my plan is to, for our 900 grams of yarn, measure out 6 grams of the true black and about 6 grams of the blued steel and dissolve them in a non-specified volume of water. I will have it in a large jar, a really big jar. I'm going to want to make it fairly dilute as I add it to the yarn, which I'll talk about a little bit more. But the goal at least is to get it dissolved so we're ready to go.
Coincidentally, I ended up measuring out 6.2 grams of both colors.
I ended up measuring out another 6.1 grams of blued steel. And all the colors are looking very just black to me. I'm not feeling much or any blue, so we will have to see. We will have to see. I mean, maybe I see it. Oh, I don't know. But let's go over to our yarn. Our yarn has all mostly cooled and we've got our delightful flames and then our mostly white bases. Actually, there is still a bit of warmth in some of these places, but I'm not going to worry about that. Instead of dip dyeing the yarn, I'm planning on doing some full immersion in the steam pan for all 9 skeins. To aid me tell how far I want the colors to go, I am going to take some zip ties and place it around part of the yarn. This is maybe goodness, okay. It's like the little over the width of my hand. And then I'll be able to lay it over into another pan as we do this. Now, I am going to be placing, in most cases, 2 skeins together. But the one that I did the first is just going to have 1. It doesn't matter. I'm pulling these zip ties tight, but it doesn't really matter for what we're doing. Having the zip ties tight is really just helping me keep track of the color and the area that we want to remain out of solution. And then here we have some more white. That is totally fine. This is something that I like to do when I am doing self-striping yarn or anything where I want to make sure that one of the colors does not go beyond a certain spot. I don't think that they're all going to be absolutely equal. If I were trying to do multiple skeins to use in one project and I wanted this to be really consistent, then I would try harder to make sure to do this. This kind of colorway would actually be super duper fun as with a self-striping base. If this were a 6-meter skein, having just this tiny or even smaller, like a tiny little patch of orange, then when you knit every once in a while there would just be a tiny little blip, very Candlelight-esque. Okay, now I am going to take all these out, doing our best to arrange the rest of the yarn here in the pan. And I am setting this up, sort of reorganizing where everything is. And there is a variety in the relative amount of warmth left in. I have my second steam pan brought close so that way there's no risk of the yarn hanging down into the flame or anything like that. I am going to be bringing in about 18 grams of dye total. Ooh, that is pretty. Before it was looking very black, but now as I pour it on, it is feeling like very blue to me. So what I did was I had a bunch of water here, and then I, with my turkey baster, added in some of this dye that I mixed. And this isn't going to give me perfect coverage, but since there's really not that much other liquid in here, we're going to start getting some really good penetration of this color. And I'm going to keep doing this, I guess, slowly, having, you know, diluting the dye and pouring it on and doing that. There was no additional acid in here yet, and we are going to carry on bringing some water, maybe like half full in the cup, and then a few 100 milliliters of the dye to slowly add it onto the yarn. And the yarn does have acid in it, just for the record. Slowly, I added more and more water with the dye, pouring it all over and massaging it through a little bit to try to make sure that we had good coverage of all our yarn. Now, in one case, I did accidentally touch part of the yarn I held in reserve, but mostly I have been able to really get nice, beautiful coverage of the yarn. Now, there's still no acid in here, but by the time I stopped to come back and check in, I had added about half of the dye that I'd mixed. All right, this color is so deep. Now I want to start adding in this last bit that has been hanging out. And this part, oops, I accidentally went over the zip tie. Okay. I want to go about up to the zip tie and try to not go over. I am dipping this part in and bringing it out. This is going to be lighter in coverage than the rest of what we see down here, which is sort of like that little bit of halo almost. When you have light and darkness, you can sort of see a little bit right around the candles. At least that is what I am going for with this lighter coverage right there, and then the darker coverage down here. Okay, now let's turn on the heat. Okay, the heat is on medium, and once again, we've got, you can't really see it because it's blown out, but we've got the yarn up there out of the water. And let's come in with some acid. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now don't forget there was already some acid in that yarn. Yeah, there was some acid in the yarn already. I am just moving it a bit to help distribute the color. I would say we are around a 1% depth of shade here, because I had measured out about 18 grams of dye total, and we've only put in about half of that, and we have 900 grams of yarn here in the pan. So now we wait. I'll keep an eye on it. I don't want it to bubble too vigorously, but let's check back in. I'll check back in once the pan is hot. How about that? It's just a few minutes in and things are starting to get steamy. And I am already going to reduce the heat to low, even if it's going to make things take longer. And the reason for that is I started getting nervous about the back pot getting too warm. Because if sometimes the sides of the pan don't get super hot, sometimes they do, and I just don't want to burn the yarn back here. So one of the things that I did was to add water to this pan in the back. There's just a little bit of water in there, enough that if the bottom of the pan gets warm from being near the center of the stove, we therefore won't burn the yarn that is sitting out. So I think that is good. Yeah, it's definitely feeling warm up on that edge. I've also made sure to scooch the pan back a little bit, but yeah, now we just have to wait. Now with the heat on low, or really I guess medium low versus more medium, it's going to take longer for the pan to heat up, but there's also less risk that the back pan that the edge will get too hot. And I'm just going to come in every once in a while. Oops, did I dip too low on that? And just dip these in. Get a little bit of heat, they will get a little bit of steam. Yeah, that feels warm right there. And there we go. There we go. All right. I think that this should hopefully work really, really well. I'm a bit nervous. I'm a bit nervous. I just destroyed all of this yarn. But we will, I guess, wait and see. That's all we can do. It's been 15 minutes and we've got some good steam on the surface. I can comfortably touch the side of the pan, and the water in the back pan is cool. So that is good. I am curious. There is a ton of color left in there, which honestly we didn't really expect much different. Well, actually, all things considered, that's not that much color. Let's go ahead and do two things. One, let's add a little bit more water. All right, I just added 1 liter of water, and while I'm doing this, we'll turn the heat up to high. 1 liter of water and 6 more tablespoons of white vinegar. The rationale here is, again, to just let, you know, things be able to move. All right, so I'm feeling some warmth on this skein, but I think that that could be, I'm feeling some warmth on the side of that pan, and down there as well. Maybe I should, there we go, move the other skein a little further apart to separate that. But I just have it heating on high right now while I'm right here. And you can see that we are nice and steamy. And I'm gonna help try without splashing to move things around. Mainly because I want to help distribute the heat. I am not super familiar with blued steel. It is not a color I use very often at all, so I am not sure how quickly it may or may not absorb. And because I am curious, oh, okay. So here is just one little 10-gram micro skein. I just plopped it in, and even though it looks super, super dark around here, and I mean, I think if I were to add 100 grams, remove everything else, I would be able to get a fair amount of pigment on there. I think more of the color has absorbed already than I really think. But there's also a lot of liquid in here. And so in addition to helping distribute the heat, moving things around a little bit like this can maybe help some dye that may have been stuck somewhere absorb. But yeah, this is definitely a lot more pastel than what I was expecting. All right, I'm gonna just leave that in there and we'll see what we absorb. And I'm going to reduce the heat back to a medium low. And checking on the yarn. Yeah, I'm definitely feeling like the edge of the pan is getting warm now and feeling warmth here in the yarn. I'm just trying to keep an eye on it and move things around so that way we do not, again, burn the yarn. But I think things overall are working very, very well. So I will now come back in another 15 minutes. We still have a lot of leftover dye. I think I have the same volume of dye that I added on those 9 skeins. So I can't just throw all this dye on one skein and call it the end. I mean, I could dye 9 more skeins, but I don't need that many more leave no dye behind skeins for the Chanukah samplers. I could, however, go ahead and dye in another base just some of this really dark navy black semi-solid, which might be what I do as a bonus video. But anyway, I definitely overestimated the amount of dye that I wanted. I thought that I was going to want a 2%, a 1 to 2% depth of shade, and really I was happy with about half of that. Now, we could end up changing our mind again later, but you know, it's always just worth figuring this out. But when you mix too much, I try not to keep too many random unknown concentrations of dye around because it haunts me. But anyway, let's go check in on the yarn. All right, I don't remember if it's been 15 or 20 minutes or what, but I'm gonna turn off the heat. There is a lot less color in this leftover mop than I expected. And if I move this, ooh, there are some clouds of color. Clouds of color make me nervous, makes me think of bleeding. I am seeing some clouds of color, but maybe that's because there is some color trapped in with our yarn, I hope. Hopefully we won't get some bleeding with this. But anyway, I am gonna leave things in here to cool for a bit. And then once I can comfortably handle it, then we will come and move it. And some of these ends are fairly warm. So these ends that dipped in, they definitely did get warmth in there. So we don't need to worry about that. Things are still a bit warm, but they're cooling off. And let's remove the zip tie, which really wasn't providing resist as much as it was there to help us hold the color where we wanted it. And I mean, it seems to have cleared, and this is so cool. It is a deep, deep, really more of a navy than black, and then with this pop of orange. I am so excited. I removed the rest of the zip tie markers and set all the yarn aside so that way it could finish cooling so we could wash it. The water is clear. There are a few spots where there are some marks on the pan that I will try to clean out. I'm not really sure why the yarn down here was still warmer than the yarn down here, but looking at this little mop though, it is really pretty, but it also just shows how much of that color was already in the yarn at that point. All right, and now once everything cools, we will wash it. Let's start washing this yarn. I love the difference in the intensity from the dark to then that little bit of halo around the candle. I think that is awesome. And wahoo for not seeing any color come out in the bath. That always makes me happy. I'm gonna add a bit of some dish soap now, and we're gonna cross our fingers. Ooh. And that is looking great. I don't see any bleeding. I am going to put my yarn through my Nina Soft spin dryer and then hang it to dry so we can come back for some conclusions. Now, I would normally share links to my spin dryer and things like that, but the model of the one that I use is discontinued, but the brand is Laundry Alternative. That's just why I don't chat about it more, but I have a whole review and I absolutely love using a spin dryer to help with the drying process. And we also have our yarn mops to wash. Not that I'm expecting to see any bleeding on these either. These have overall way less pigment than the other yarn that we dyed. But I just had so much fun with this. All right. I will see you with the dry yarn in just a second. This yarn turned out amazing. You can feel the flame and the little bit of light that radiates down, and then sort of the more darkness of the room. We really achieved a midnight blue here. It doesn't feel as warm as a navy. It really is somewhere in between a navy and a black, where you might actually mistake it for a black at times, but it really does have a bit of coolness to it to make it more blue, and you feel that especially up here as you approach the flame. I am thrilled. I'm not sure what it is exactly about the yarn this time, but this time I feel the flame and I don't necessarily just immediately go to a Halloween place. Last time it felt very orange and black to me. So I think that the little bit of that dipped and the little bit more navy that we have in here really does help with the feeling. The speckles are bright and, well, I mean, they're awesome. I love it. Yes, there's some places where I got a little bit of darkness over there, but we see a combination of orange, red, and yellow, or in some places almost more of a pink. And this is just from that fluorescent safety orange breaking. I didn't need to bring any other colors in, and I am just so happy. Oh man, I went to go try to find my black light, but I haven't used it in a while, and I could not find it anywhere. So I won't go have an image of this with the black light. If I find it later, I will try, but the yarn will definitely be skeined up by then. But the best part about these fluorescent colors, well, is just that if you turn off the lights, then you really will get that glow from the yarn. Oh man, where is it? Well, I'm disappointed. So, if you have a black light at home and received one of these Hanukkah packages, please look at your yarn under a black light and send me a picture on Instagram. Tag it ChemKnits Chanukah, and you can also tag me just at ChemKnits, because I would really, really like to see it. This is clearly the problem with putting things away for safekeeping. The yarn mops we got are beautiful. I think this is a medium speckled one. It's just so, so fun. I am glad I went heavier because it feels more like flames flickering. But here is the heavy one that inspired the whole colorway. And you can see the like bits of yellow, the pops of the pink speckles, and then the orange sort of radiating out, creating this flame. So, so, so fun. And this gray, the leftover color, is a really, really nice gray. I don't know if that's a result of some breaking, because it doesn't feel quite as blue as what I see on the main yarn, but anyway, it's all gorgeous. The one downside of doing everything in one pan is that I lost a little bit of control over where I was dipping things. So some have a little bit more white, but that white still has neon, very subtle yellow and pink speckles. So I think it's still beautiful. But I think it just goes to show that 900 grams in one pan is a little challenging. But overall, it worked great. And now I am gonna go twist everything up so we can see what it all looks like. I'm currently twisting up the minis, and I thought that I'd show a couple different ways. So in this way that I'm twisting, the orange and navy are sort of split. So then when I put the mini together, you can see that orange portion sort of travel all the way down, and you see that color peek through. But another way I could twist it is just keeping the orange all the way at one end and twisting it up like so. And so then, you can clearly see, I think in this case, that the orange is just at one end. So here are those two versions I just showed. And personally, I prefer to have things mixed up that way. I like to see when I twist the colors more blended together, because I think that just like some people like reskeining, it can give a sense of how those colors all work together. But it also can just be sometimes hard to see what a skein looks like once twisted. And I think that it always is useful. I honestly prefer to leave yarn as it was dyed, and I always show a picture in my shop of the yarn laid flat like this, so that way you can get a sense of how it was dyed, because this gives a much better indication of what the yarn could be like knit up versus this, where you can't necessarily immediately tell that all of the orange is at one end versus having multiple orange sections throughout. So that's just one reason why I like that. But I'd be interested to hear in which version of the twist you like better. So option A is sort of more mixed up, and option B is with all the brightness all at one end. So leave comments below. Here are some of our minis twisted up. And we also have some yarn mops over there. There are some minor differences that may or may not read on camera between each set of 10. We've got a DK and then 2 fingering sets right here. But overall, and especially twisted, I think that this really hits my inspiration of the candles on the Chanukiah, really bright in the dark room and just sitting back and enjoying that flickering light. So I'm so happy to have finally come back and tackled this again, and really I feel like I nailed it. Sometimes when you have a colorway in your mind, it works right away. Other times, like last year, I considered it an oops. And so if something doesn't work the first time, it's worth coming back and revisiting. And I'm really, really glad that I did. And I hope that you all like this color. I had so much fun revisiting this project, and I am so happy that I finally got something that fits my inspiration better. The differences are really, really subtle, but I think because we've got more variation in the bright and then our darkness is a little bit more blue, you can feel the candlelight more than you feel Halloween, so I'm thrilled. When I'm creating the Chanukah videos, it's a really fun time for me to reflect on my favorite techniques of the last year and to try to bring them together as I create this series of videos. And so I love being able to revisit something and giving it another shot. Gosh, I don't think I have a big oops this year. I mean, there's more to come, so maybe there's still an oops on the horizon, but so far, I don't have an oops that we've seen. So will there be one? Well, make sure that you are subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. In addition to special events and series like Chanukah, I do publish at least 2 new videos every single week, and you don't want to miss any of it. And while you're at it, press that bell icon to make sure your notifications are on and you never miss a new video. Will there be an oops? Well, stay tuned because we have more nights of Chanukah, more videos, and actually the videos even continue on after the 8th night of Chanukah. There are going to be at least 3 bonus videos with the series. You will be able to find all of them in the 2020 ChemKnits Chanukah playlist. I'm so excited for you to see what's in store for night 7. If you're a huge fan of ChemKnits and love the videos that I create, I do have an Etsy shop and a Patreon, and you can find links to those and other places you can find me on social media down in the video description. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.